Well, we first off want to commend you for the nice book study we just enjoyed. It was good to hear your fine comments, and certainly shows that many of you took a little time to prepare for your book study tonight. And we want to commend you for that, and we want to encourage you then next week when you go back to your smaller groups, your smaller book studies, and attend there, that you'll go back with the same earnest desire to make good comments and to do your research. And I think that's what really makes the smaller book studies a success as well, when everybody's striving to bring something extra to the book study. So we want to commend you right away. We'd like to take you back tonight to a time in the life of Christ when he was at his height of popularity, around the last part of the year 31 CE, if not the first part of the year 32 CE. And the reason why he was at his height of popularity is because he had already accomplished so much. Many people were flocking after him. At this point in time, he had already healed lepers and blind individuals. He had cured a paralytic man, a deaf individual, and had just finished also raising the son of a widow who was dead in the city of Nain, or a widow from the city of Nain. So here he is in Galilee, around the city of Nain, and people are once again wondering, what is this great teacher going to do next? What is the next miracle he's going to perform? What's the next fantastic teaching he's going to give us? And you can just imagine the anticipation as people are now flocking around Christ. We go to the book of Matthew chapter 11, and Jesus is going to utter some words that we can all learn from here tonight. And it's found in the book of Matthew chapter 11. As we peer into the scene here, Jesus surrounded by people, and Jesus with a voice that is tender, mellow, yet piercing to the very soul. Jesus says these words in verse 28. He says, "Come to me, all you who are toiling and loaded down, and I will refresh you. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am mild-tempered and lowly in heart, and you will find refreshment for your souls. For my yoke is kindly, and my load is light." So those are beautiful words, aren't they? And they probably refresh our memory on numerous articles that we have read in commentaries of the Watchtower on the meaning of the words. But tonight what we'd like to do is just pause here and look for the deeper meaning, refreshing our memories what Jesus' words actually meant. And if we do that, clearly we could say that we're really listening to the words of Christ and learning from them. What we'd like to do is pull apart the verse and then help us to appreciate the meaning, both for the congregation, insight that we can gain from Jesus' words for the congregation, and also for us individually, since, of course, a congregation is made up of just individual publishers. So let's take a look a little more closely tonight at the meaning of Jesus' words and to see what lessons we can walk away this evening with. As you look at the words here then in verse number 28 and verse number 29, the first two verses that we read, if you're a careful reader and just pause for a moment, perhaps you would notice that Jesus used three commanding words that were each preface to a commanding phrase. And so just for a moment, let's see if we can pick out the three commanding words that were prefaced to three commanding phrases. Can you see the three commanding words? What would they be? If you could see them, what would they be? Just when you see one, go ahead and raise your hand. Okay, Brother Zedwick, please. The first one would be come. That would be the first commanding word. Preface to the commanding phrase, come to me. What would be the second commanding word? Yes. Take. Very good. You're all quick. What's the third one? The third one would be, yes, please, Brother Glenn. Learn. Okay, very good. Come, take, learn. Three commanding words, preface to three commanding phrases. Come to me, take my yoke, learn from me. Now, these are all three commanding phrases. Since they're commanding phrases, one would have to pause and analyze what the command actually meant and what it entailed for us. So let's do that together. Let's take a look at the first commanding phrase together. Jesus used the command, come to me. Now, sometimes one has to pause and ask themselves to get into the mood of the command. In what frame or what voice did Jesus perhaps used when he uttered the commanding phrase. You know, when we think of commanding phrases, would it be as if a child, had done something naughty, and the father or the mother looks at the child and says, "Come here, come to me"? You think that's the way Jesus uttered those words, "Come to me," when everybody's watching him? Or would you think it would be rather if a child had done something wrong, or had hurt themselves, rather, and maybe fallen and scratched their knee and was crying, and so the parent or the mother or the father get down on their knees, maybe to the level of the child, and hold out their arms and say, "Come to me, come here." And the child responds quickly, and then there's an ensuing embrace, and then pretty soon the world's okay again. Isn't that something? Children have a way of recovering like that, don't you think? I think it's probably then the latter, wouldn't you say? That must have been the appeal in Jesus' voice when he said, "Come to me." Now, the next thing we should take note of is that Jesus told us who we are to come to. Did you notice that? He said, "Come to me." Now, he could have said, "Come to Buddha." He could have said that, because Buddha had been around about 500, 600 years prior to Christ. He could have said, "Come to Hinduism." He could have said that too, because that had been around about almost 700 years prior to Christ. But Jesus didn't say that. He said, "Come to me." And he could say that with authority because he knew he was the way, the truth, and the life. So he gave them an authoritative command, "Come to me." Now, the next thing one should notice is who he asked to come to him. He said, "Come to me, all of you who are toiling and loaded down." Now, that's a big phrase. Come to me, all of you who are toiling and loaded down. So would that describe some of you here tonight, toiling and loaded down? Or wouldn't it describe really all of us at some time, All of us at times feel like we're toiling and loaded down. That's basically what life is today. Many times we go through different situations or conditions or circumstances in life that really make us feel like we're toiling, that we're loaded down under pressure. And sometimes we feel like we're going to break under the pressure. We had one time where we had a brother who was an elder, and at the Kingdom Hall, we were sitting towards the rear of the Kingdom Hall, and just so happened the meeting had started, and this brother walks in late. He's coming in late with his family. Now, unbeknownst to the rest of the congregation, the reason why he was late getting to the meeting is because he was late coming home from work, because there was an emergency at work, and so he runs home late. He gets into the home. There, all of the family is sitting there waiting to go to the meeting. And he says, "Just get the kids in the car." He didn't have time to eat or take a shower or anything. He just grabbed a tie, and he says, "I'll explain it to you later." And he runs out to the car, and they're driving down to the Kingdom Hall as fast as the law would allow, and you hear outside the Kingdom Hall the doors slamming, bang, bang, bang. It's a big family, and they're coming into the door of the Kingdom Hall. They're coming in, and all the little children, like little ducklings, following the parents. They're walking as quickly as they can, and they're looking for seats. It's a full Kingdom Hall, and the only seats that are available are right down in the, look at that, the front row of the Kingdom Hall. Just like tonight. And he walks down the middle of the row, and all the little duckling children, they're walking, and they're looking at their dad, and he goes, "Gets in the, sit them all down the front row," and he sits down. A brother comes up and says, "You're supposed to open with the meeting with the prayer." And he gets up right when the song is finished. He comes up to the podium, he says, "Oh, Jehovah," he says, "help us settle down and get something out of this meeting tonight." So you think, that's a true story. That's a true story. You think that brother was toiling and loaded down? Well, he was. And then later on, he could tell you why. So all of us, just because of the day of experience or life circumstances, find us in that category at one time or another. That's why Jesus' words really have meaning for all of us. When you read them that way, when he said, "Come to me, all of you who are toiling and loaded down." And why? He promises, "I will refresh you," because you're going to find a refreshment. He's going to give the refreshment. He promises that. So how do we come to Christ? Well, this particular command commands all of us to come to hear his teaching. Jesus said, "Wherever two or more are gathered, there I will be as well." So the implication is to come to Christ by listening to the commands, first of all, to meet together, to come together to hear the voice of Christ. to hear the teachings of Christ, to have them expounded upon, and helping us to, embrace the teaching for us, for the personal application that we find. The provisions that we have from the faithful slave are numerous for this type of response, because we have our meetings throughout the week, and that is the primary way we find this first refreshment that Jesus mentions. Come to me, all of you who are toiling and loaded down, and I will refresh you. This makes us stop then and analyze our meeting attendance as a congregation and as individuals. And as we looked at the congregation statistics, and we know the statistics don't tell us the whole story, but on Tuesday, as you know, in the afternoon, we meet with one or more of the elders and go over the congregational statistics. And in the last 6 months, the congregation, for the most part, on our public meeting, is having an attendance of 103 at the public meeting. Now, we do have 103 publishers here, so that would make us perceive that, 100% of us are here. But if you look around, you also see, my goodness, half this audience are young children, And so what we're looking for is something that would be representative of not just the young children that are attending, but also all of the publishers that should be in attendance as well, to hear the words of Christ. As he commands us, come to me, all of you who are toiling and loaded down. Our book study sees about 79 or 76% in attendance on the basis of 103 publishers, and 93% or 96 in attendance on a regular basis at our school and service meeting. So as we think about these statistics, one has to analyze, are we really listening to the voice of Christ? Do we really understand the words? Because if statistics hold true, you see, tonight we have 143 here in attendance. Tuesday night for our book study, we had 136. So now if statistics hold true, you see next week, 30 to 40 of us will choose not to come to our school and not to come to the book study. So one must pause and ask, when Christ gives us that first command, do I really respond? And if not, why not? Why would I not respond to that type of command? Come to me, all of you who are toiling and loaded down, and I will refresh you, the promise. One brother came to the meeting, he said, those words are so true. He says, tonight I didn't get anything out of the meeting intellectually, but he said, I still know I'm a recipient of Holy Spirit. And that in itself refreshed him, knowing that he was where he needed to be. Now, some individuals, as we recognize, we might not be able to be at the meetings if we're sick, or we have some kind of scriptural obligation to care for. Emergencies sometimes come up. But that's generally not the case on a regular routine. So why would one miss the meetings? Sometimes individuals say they miss the meetings because they feel like they're toiling and loaded down. And that's exactly when Jesus said we should hear his command clearly. He said, when you are toiling and loaded down, now you know exactly where you need to be. And there's a reason for that. If we keep ourselves away from the meetings, it's self-defeating. And it could be self-destructive as well, spiritually. So one must wait and look at it themselves. Analyze it from your own perspective. When I'm toiling and loaded down, what do I do? What's my response? Sometimes we hide ourselves away. But Jesus said, come to me. When you feel that way, come to me. Fight it. Fight that desire to stay away or to stay home. Come to me, he said, and then you'll receive the refreshment that comes from the attendance at the provisions for refreshing, and that's here at the meetings. Now let's take a look at the second commanding phrase. Jesus said, the second commanding phrase, take my yoke upon you. Second commanding phrase. One would have to stop and once again ask, well, what was Jesus saying? Take my yoke upon you. So what is a yoke? One has to stop and say, well, what's a yoke? Well, the yoke, we're not talking about an egg yolk, right? We're talking about the yoke that Jesus used illustratively here. And the yoke in ancient days was usually a bar or frame. We could describe it made out of wood in general. And it was used to put two animals, working animals, together in tandem so that they could pull a workload so that the workload would be half as heavy as if they were pulling it by themselves. So pulling it in tandem, they share the weight, the load of responsibility. And so he says, he uses a beautiful illustration. He says, take my yoke upon you. Now, what was the yoke that Jesus was speaking about? Well, Jesus, remember, received his yoke of responsibility from his Father, Jehovah God. And that responsibility was to do God's will. So when Jesus asked his disciples, he said, take my yoke upon you, he wasn't saying, here's my yoke, take it. He wasn't saying that. He was, in essence, telling us to become his yoke fellow. Because remember, two under the yoke in tandem. So Jesus said, in essence, come under my yoke. Take my yoke upon you. Come and be my yoke fellow. And in reality, then, that is an invitation to become a disciple of Christ. It is the yoke of discipleship. That's exactly what Jesus was offering. Become my disciple. Take my yoke of discipleship upon you. And then follow me in doing the will of God. And so what a wonderful invitation, because when one thinks about being a yoke fellow with Christ Jesus, that has a lot of meaning. When does one become a yoke fellow? Well, one becomes a yoke fellow when they dedicate their lives to do God's will and symbolize that dedication by water baptism. So one truly becomes a yoke fellow with Christ when they are a dedicated, baptized witness of Jehovah God. Now, here in the congregation, we have a number of those. We have, we have a total of 97 baptized witnesses of Jehovah God. 97 that are under the yoke of Christ. Now, there are 6 unbaptized publishers. Now, could we say that the 6 unbaptized publishers are under the yoke of Christ? And the answer would be no, not yet. But they're on their way, aren't they? Because they're making progress to becoming a true disciple, a yoke fellow with Christ Jesus, a dedicated disciple. And that's the first step, learning what God's will is. First, you have to learn what it is before you can say, I want to do it. And then you make the obligation, the vow to do God's will, and thus become a dedicated servant of God. So we commend the unbaptized publishers. In fact, we had one newly baptized publisher since last visit. One newly baptized publisher since last visit. A new one that came under the yoke. And, by the way, one reactivated in his work in being a yoke fellow with Christ Jesus. Now, this brings up another subject, to remain active and regular in the ministry. Because I want you to notice what the New English Bible says on this second command. The New English Bible gives it a little more flavor when it says, instead of take my yoke upon you, now listen to this, it says, bend your necks to my yoke. Bend your neck to my yoke. So what does that mean? Well, if you bend your neck, that means you're basically changing your posture. You're submitting, if you will, to kingly authority. You come under the yoke with Christ, and you change your posture. You humble yourself, and you submit to his direction. Bend your neck to my yoke. This is my yoke. Come under it with me. So in essence, then, when one becomes a dedicated baptized witness, he's submitting to the yoke of Christ. He's not getting under the yoke and saying, let's go this way, Jesus, go this way, Jesus says, you come with me, and you go, I bend my neck to your yoke, and you just follow the master. You don't rationalize things and say, I dedicated my life to do, the ministry, but not this month. All right. I dedicated my life to put kingdom interest first, but maybe later. You don't do it that way. And it's illustrative, isn't it? Because Jesus uses the illustration to put a picture in our mind, right? That's why he made it that way. That's why he taught that way. And so once we understand a point of truth, we don't rationalize it. We don't justify our own thinking. No longer do we live according to our will. We do it God's way, according to God's will. And that means sacrifice. We have to change our posture to come under the yoke of Christ. And this means then when we receive counsel or correction, if we're given guidance through theocratic directive. It doesn't matter who we are, whether we're elders or servants, pioneers, publishers, all of us in union submit to the yoke, and we follow the direction. Jesus gives that direction also through the faithful slave. So as directives come from the faithful slave, we humbly submit. And then we're thankful to Jehovah God that we do, because we always receive the blessings as a result. This keeps a congregation in unity. There's no bickering or fighting or in-house fighting. But we're humble servants of Jehovah God as we serve under the yoke of Christ. It's beautiful, isn't it? And, of course, it applies to all of us. In our ministry, it's obvious, that many of us have been making efforts for working as diligently as we can with the zeal that is significant of a dedicated witness of God. People know Jehovah's Witnesses. They're inspired by their conviction and their zeal for doing the ministry. Here in the congregation, listen to this, taking out the pioneers and the auxiliary pioneers, just the publishers alone from each month. For the last 6 months, we had 4,673 hours that were dedicated to the ministry. 4,673 hours. That's an average of over 8 hours, about 8.2 hours on the average for all the publishers. That's a nice average, isn't it? Nice average. With 14% supporting the auxiliary and regular pioneer work, that's wonderful. We had 10 that found time in the last 6 months to auxiliary pioneer. Excellent statistics there as well that we have to report to the branch. And there's been a number of you that have made improvement, too, as we were going through the cards. A number of the publishers that were in the 1 to 5 hour bracket that felt that they had more potential, that they weren't reaching their fullest potential, we noticed that many of them made strides to increase their activity in the ministry. We want to commend you folks, too, because this is encouraging not just to us, but also to the branch. The branch takes notice as well. And this also helps the branch then put together information that will help congregations around the United States, especially, to keep focus on what they can do to maintain, a constant level of improvement in their ministry, thus bringing the greatest productivity to your territory. Well, let's go to the third commanding phrase, shall we? Because it's just as important. The third commanding phrase says, learn from me. That's a simple one, isn't it? Learn from me. Well, now one has to say, learn what? Learn from me. Learn what? Jesus answered. He said, learn from me, for I am mild-tempered and lowly in heart. And then he added, and you will find refreshment for your souls. Now let's make sense of the words, because someone might say, well, what is Jesus trying to tell you? And he said, I am mild-tempered, lowly in heart. So one could start to conclude, well, Jesus is mild-tempered and lowly in heart. That means that he's not going to be an oppressive master. That's what that means. That's true. That means that. That if he's mild-tempered and lowly in heart, he's not going to demand of us more than we can give. He's a reasonable master. That's true, too. And in fact, since he says you're going to find refreshment for your soul, that means, too, that following Christ, being a lowly and hearted individual and a mild-mannered master, mild-tempered master, that we're not going to just find refreshment now from day to day in spite of our problems, but also we have a wonderful refreshment for the hope ahead as well, a total refreshment in the future. But is that all Jesus meant? Watchtower commentaries help us to appreciate that there's much more involved in this last commanding phrase than meets the eye. First, one would analyze that Jesus, did you notice, said that there is a second refreshment involved here. Did you catch that? He said, learn from me, for I am mild-tempered and lowly in heart, and you will find refreshment from your soul. Now, this is a second refreshment that is mentioned from verse number 28 when he said, come to me, and I will refresh you. The first refreshment we've already spoken about. He said, come to me, I will refresh you. But here's the second mention of refreshment, and it is a second type of refreshment. Because he said, if I read it this way, learn from me, for I am mild-tempered and lowly in heart, and you will find refreshment for your soul. The first he said, I will give you refreshment. The second he says, you will find the refreshment. But in essence, you'll only find, now listen, the second refreshment if you learn what it means to be mild-tempered and lowly in heart. So what Jesus was saying is that there is a second refreshment in store for disciples who learn what it means to be mild-tempered and lowly in heart. So let's give you an illustration of that. Say, for example, you come to a meeting like this, and you sit here. You know, we've sat here now for about an hour and 15 minutes. And then you leave the Kingdom Hall, and you go home, and you yell and scream at your children, or you yell and scream at your wife, or you yell and scream at your husband. Then you are not mild-tempered, nor are you lowly in heart, and you do not have the second refreshment. Say, for example, you sit in a meeting like this, educational meeting, learning from the words of Christ, but yet when you leave the meeting, on your way home, you say, you know, that sister, she makes me sick, and that brother, you see what he said to me, and I can't believe he said that to me. And you start, getting all riled up. Then you are not mild-tempered, nor are you lowly in heart, and you do not have the second refreshment. Now, an interesting commentary from the Watchtower said this, that unfortunately this second refreshment may not be the possession of all of God's people this side of Armageddon. Not everyone may receive the second refreshment. And wouldn't that be sad? Wouldn't that be sad? Because we're the ones that really need the second refreshment. We need it. We go out and we take all kinds of abuse from people. We're preaching the good news, and we're doing it happily. Isn't it an interesting phenomenon that we can go from door to door, and someone can do all kinds of things, slam the door or say this, on occasion they're very mean sometimes. Not because they know you, you're just the messenger, but because the message, it's the representation of what you're bringing. And so they get all that, and they do all this, and you look at me and go, well, have a nice day, and you walk away, and it's like water off the duck's back, isn't that right? But then you come into the Kingdom Hall, and you say, that brother didn't even smile at me. No, he didn't say hello. I'm offended, and you get on your huffy bike and ride off. That's true, isn't it? Sometimes it's true. So, it's illustrative of a second refreshment that we need. So what is the second refreshment? First of all, when one learns what it really means to be mild-tempered, to give our brothers the benefit of the doubt, to learn how to work together in peaceful relationships to accomplish the will of God. When we are lowly in heart, not thinking too much of ourselves or our own opinion, like we know it all. I've got it all encapsulated. I know how it's supposed to be, just like this. And then all of a sudden, our blinders come off. And we go, oh my, I didn't know it all, did I, Now we're learning what it means to be lowly in heart, to be acceptant of the counsel that Jehovah God gives us. We're lowly in heart. We're humble servants of God. We're still teachable. We never will know it all. And then we appreciate our brotherhood even more. We don't think badly or ill of our brother behind their back. Everyone who's here at this meeting loves Jehovah God. And if they love Jehovah God, then they're striving to make changes in their life. And all of us, still have a whole 1,000 years to go of changes. Isn't that right? So can we be lowly in heart and mild-tempered as our brothers are making their changes? It's like one dictionary said what a brotherhood is. It said the brotherhood, this is a secular dictionary, it said a brotherhood is a whole body of people engaged in the same line of work, i.e., the ministry. Isn't that something? That's a brotherhood. And that's exactly what we're doing. And as we think about our brothers then, we think about how each of us are different, but we also appreciate how then each person brings something to the congregation that strengthens it. And this is what Jesus meant then, that we find an inner refreshment. What's the second refreshment? It is an inner refreshment. Being at peace in your heart, having a peace of mind, knowing, now listen, that your relationships are intact. Your relationships with your brothers and sisters are intact. That you can sleep well at night, knowing that there's nothing that is hindering your relationship with your brothers and with your God Jehovah. That's what the second refreshment is. And we all need that, don't we? All need that refreshment. So that's what Jesus meant. And then he goes back, notice in verse number 30. He said, "For my yoke is kindly, and my load is light." Isn't it interesting that he goes back to the yoke? Second time he mentions the yoke. Why? Because he just didn't have anything else to say. No, he was not being redundant. In fact, now he's bringing something else out. He says, "My yoke is kindly." Did you notice that? He didn't say the yoke is kindly. He said, "My yoke is kindly," meaning that there are other yokes that an individual could take on. Jesus' yoke is not the only yoke. Jesus said his yoke was kindly. The word kindly, according to the interlinear, it says that it is easy-fitting. Remember that phrase? The yoke of Christ is easy-fitting. So what does that mean? Well, you remember, some of you young ones here now, here's an opportunity for you. Remember what kind of work Jesus did before he went into the ministry? What kind of profession did he have before he went into the ministry? What skill did he learn? Okay, you remember? Yes, go ahead, just speak right up. That's right, he was a carpenter, that's right. And so we had a beautiful article just a few years ago that talked about Jesus. Since he was a carpenter, he knew what he was speaking about when he talked about yokes, because in ancient days, an Israelite family would have what we know were the working animals, which were the oxen. If they were farmers, they had working animals, oxen that would pull a heavy load, and they needed the yoke. And so, because these animals were so precious to the family, that they earned the living for the family, there came time when there needed to have new yokes because they were hard workers. So when Petunia and Daisy needed a new yoke, you wouldn't go someplace like Walmart, and buy a generic yoke. You'd buy a custom-made yoke, So you called a carpenter. And the carpenter would come out, and he would measure Daisy. Daisy's this wide. Petunia's this wide. She's a bigger animal, And so where's Petunia going to be? She's going to be on the right or the left. You take a lot of interest, in the animals. And then he'd measure and see the little humps and everything that were peculiar to each animal. And then he'd hone out the yoke specifically made for each of the oxen. Here's where Daisy's going to go. I'm going to hone it out this way. And then after he honed it out, he would line it with leather so it would never abrase the animals. They're too precious to have some kind of abrasion on their skin. So the Watchtower concluded, it said in commentary, if Jesus would have performed that much effort, given that much effort for an ox, what kind of effort do you think the Master would perform in considering your limitations, your availability, your abilities to serve the Christ? He would take into consideration all your needs and your limitations. And that's why he said, my yoke is kindly. It's easy-fitting. But there are other yokes, remember, that are not easy-fitting. In fact, there are other yokes that are very abrasive. People take these yokes many times on for themselves, all in their own decision-making. Sometimes the yokes that Satan offers people are very heavy. They are iron-like. They will abrase people. They take the energy away. It leaves people feeling hopeless, and it grinds people under. It abrases them on a day-to-day basis. And sometimes individuals make the choice themselves, consciously, to take other yokes on. Sometimes it's a secular yoke that keeps them from being fully under the yoke of Christ. Maybe it abrases them from the secular side because they've made decisions that hinder them from making spiritual advancement. Or it could be other yokes, like even things that seemingly seem good, like maybe a yoke of recreation that's too much, or maybe even a hobby. It just started out to be a hobby, I made a little garden. It was a little hobby. Now I have 40 acres, It's like, I can't go to the meeting anymore. Or these other yokes that sometimes get out of hand, and then they abrase and pull people down. Now, a very interesting Watchtower on this back in 1962, page 120, said that it is unfortunate that sometimes individuals will take so many other yokes of responsibility upon them that they begin to think that the yoke of Christ is the heavy yoke, thinking that it's too much for them to bear. Like, well, they want us to go to 3 meetings a week? Oh, I can't believe it. 3 meetings a week. And they want you to read the Bible every day. Man, what do they want? Blood? And then they want you to study with your kids. Got to spend time with them. And then they want you to, also keep in mind prayer and meditation. And I don't know, it's just too heavy. But this is exactly the thinking sometimes individuals can get themselves into. Why? Not because the yoke of Christ is too heavy, but many times it's because of the extra yokes that individuals have decided on their own to take upon themselves. So the Watchtower said this. It said, the more dedicated an individual is, the lighter and more kindly the yoke will feel. The more dedicated you are. It said, for example, can you just for a moment think of asking maybe a pioneer who's been in the work for a number of years, or a Bethelite, or a missionary, or a branch servant who have served for a number of years, if they feel that the yoke of Christ is too heavy for them? Undoubtedly, you will always find the same answer, that the individuals are encouraged because of being under the yoke of Christ. And that's why they feel that they must be fully dedicated to doing God's will. That's why Jesus said, my yoke is kindly, and my load, the load of responsibility, is indeed light. As you look at this text of Scripture here, just 3 verses, and you analyze the congregation, we analyze ourselves, what we've been doing, we've seen a lot of improvement. A number of things indicate that we're striving to make sure that we're staying wholly under the yoke of Christ. Like, for example, irregularity is down below 10%. That's wonderful. And, last time that we were here, we encouraged the congregation to catch up in the territory, covering our territory. We're doing good now. Only 2 territories have not been covered in a whole year, and I'm sure those are going to be covered before the week is up. So think just for a moment the progress that you've made. 6 months went by very quickly. What progress have we made? And ask yourself, am I really listening and learning from the words of Christ? Have I heard the 3 commands tonight when Jesus said, come to me? He said, take my yoke. And he also said, yes, learn from me. And if so, you are a blessed individual. If there are areas that we need to make improvement, then tonight is the night that we can show that we're listening to the words of Christ. Because so many things apply to all of our congregations throughout the circuit. And we haven't selected, one specific point here to just push home. No, the points apply to all of us. So let's think about what we've learned tonight, shall we? Think just for a moment. Is your heart heavy tonight? Do you toil? Maybe you have some sadness. Maybe you labor under a sin. Maybe you have a secret fault that you have yet to confess. Come to me, Jesus says. Maybe you find yourself under stress. Maybe even to the breaking point at times. Maybe nothing is working out. Maybe your children have broken your heart. Maybe they've done something that was not right. Or maybe, on the other hand, maybe your parents have broken your heart. Maybe they've tarnished the image that they once had in your eyes. Come to me. Jesus beckons you. Maybe you suffer from depression too. That could be a trialsome thing, to suffer from depression. It's a chemical problem. And yet you may internalize the thing, and you may think to yourself, is my depression because I'm not whole-souled? Maybe you suffer because there's little joy right now in life. Maybe you find yourself just at the time of life. It's the time of life, or just the day that's too much to handle. Maybe you find yourself, sleeping in bed, and you're waking up in the morning and you're not sure whether you want to get out of bed today, face the day's challenges. Maybe the friends that you have are not helping you. Maybe your family is of no help. Then the words, come to me, are the words that Jesus urges each of us to listen to, because all of us at times seem nearly pushed to the limit of life, the relentless and merciless demands that are upon all of us. And so how wonderful it is, would you not agree, to hear the words of Christ continuing to echo even to this day when he says, "Come to me, all of you who are toiling and loaded down." And then he said, "And I promise you, I will refresh you." Wouldn't you agree that you understand those words just a little bit better tonight? Wouldn't you agree with that? So as we meditate on the lessons tonight, we're sure that we can go home and we can rest assured that Jehovah God will help us to make application of the things that we need to make application of. And you know, we still have plenty of opportunity to demonstrate that we love the yoke of Christ this week, being together. Tomorrow we're going to be out in the service 9:15, 1:15 in the afternoon if you can join us, 9:30 on Saturday and 9:30 on Sunday as well. So we'll on Sunday, I want to just let you or be mindful for you that we're going to meet in the back room here, and we're very quick on Sunday, so we're going to start promptly at 9:30, and we'll be out of here and probably out of the parking lot by 9:40. So make sure if you're coming out on Sunday that you work hard to be there on time so that you'll get the proper arrangement. And then Sunday, remember our final talk, or the public talk is what is the public talk? Is facing the future with faith and courage. Facing the future with faith and courage. And then the final talk is do not give up in doing what is fine. Hopefully you'll be able to invite Bible studies and return visits to those two talks as well. So let's stand, and we're going to conclude with a word of prayer tonight, or rather a song and a word of prayer. And as we stand, we're going to sing song number 224, and then we'll ask if Brother Millay will come up, and I'm sorry, not Brother Millay, Brother Still, if Brother Still would come up and represent us in a word of prayer tonight. Song 224.